This is Join Us in France, episode 287. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and on today's episode, Elyse and I talk about the big famous department stores in Paris. We call them Les Grands Magasins, and it turns out their history is fascinating. I know you cannot visit Paris right now because of the pandemic, but it's possible we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, at least for those of us who are young and healthy and won't be too intimidated by travel. I'll update you on the things that are reopening in France starting on June 2nd after my conversation with Elyse. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/287, the number 287. And if you're planning a trip to France, the site is chock full of great resources. You should check it out. Bonjour, Elyse.
Bonjour, Annie.
Here we are again, sitting on my patio.
It's so nice.
Yes, recording outside. Hopefully nobody's going to have the crazy idea to mow.
Right.
Or weed whack.
Or do like next to my house, there's a circular saw going to do some remodeling work. It's horrible. Starting 7:30 in the morning.
Oh, dear.
But it's so nice to see you.
It's very nice to see you. And today we are talking about Les Grands Magasins.
Les Grands Magasins.
So department stores.
Yes.
And there's a whole history to this, it turns out.
It turns out,
Yeah.
much to our mutual discovery and talking about what can we talk about shopping? Well, there's shopping and then there's shopping. But it turns out
So we're probably going to do several episodes around shopping. Like several months ago, I asked on the Facebook group where everybody likes to go shopping when they are in Paris.
Right.
I doubt we're going to get to that today, but we'll do another episode about that. But first, we wanted to talk about the history of these beautiful department stores.
Because they are indeed very, very beautiful. And in fact, they are a tourist attraction, not just for going to buy things, but people actually go to these buildings.
Just to look.
Just to look.
Because they are so gorgeous.
They're so gorgeous to see them on the outside. And of course, with a couple of them, to see them, see what they'll look like on the inside.
Yeah. So there are four you want to talk about today.
So there are four I'd like to talk about today. We'll start with, I just wanted to give a little bit of background information, which, now, this may be a very kind of, I don't know if sexist is the right word. I hate using words like that. But the comment I'm going to make is mostly addressed usually towards women. It just is a fact of culture in our world, I guess. The whole concept of going into a store, wandering around the store and shopping. I know there are some men who like to do it, but in general, it's really something women do more than men.
Yes.
Okay. Well, it turns out that the history of the development of department stores is really connected to the history of women and activity outside the home.
I see.
So that's part of what I found so fascinating about this, aside from the fact that these buildings really are beautiful and they do have gorgeous things, which certainly someone like me, cannot afford. But that is not how they started. That's actually not how they started. So, department stores, les grands magasins.
So, in French we call them the great stores.
The big stores, right? The
Yes.
big stores. And, of course, part of that is because they were, in fact, when they were begun, it was a revolution. It was a revolution in commerce, and it was a revolution in the idea of how you buy things. Because prior to the beginning of department stores, you went to small shops, and especially for things like clothing, everything was custom made. Everything was made. You bought the cloth. You went to a little shop. They measured you. Now, the irony is that is what the upper class does. You know, they do everything custom made. Whereas before, that was simply the norm. That was what people did. There was no such thing as mass production. There was no such thing as having things ready-made.
Yeah, I remember as a kid being taken to a seamstress who measured me and made me things.
Now,
and my parents were not wealthy.
Right.
It was just normal.
See,
I don't know.
I find this fascinating, and I'm so glad you just said that, because that is the difference between growing up here and growing up in the States. Because even my mom, who was a child in, the 30s, I don't think she ever had custom-made clothes, that it was already possible to buy inexpensive, ready-made. And so it's a very different perception of all of that. I know, because a couple of times my deceased mother-in-law would talk about what it was like when she had to make clothes for all of her 4 children. And this was in the 1940s, 1950s, when they were very small. And then she would say things like, all women should know how to sew. Well, she had a certain reactionary kind of attitude towards certain things. And I would go, I don't know how to sew. My mom didn't know how to sew. So it's really interesting to see that there's a whole cultural difference involved in all of that. But before we even begin, I have a question for you. You're not going to know the answer, but I didn't know the answer either. But I just love the idea of, okay, where was, as far as we know, the very first department store?
The very first department store in the world, you mean?
Well, I guess I have to say in the Western world, because I don't really know about other parts of the world.
Could it be London?
Well, you're close in that it was in England. It turns out it wasn't in London. It was in a city called Derby.
Okay.
Which, to be honest, I don't even know where it is. I'm not sure how far from London it is.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
But it was indeed in England. And the first department store officially was opened in 1834. So that's really almost 200 years ago.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why it was in England is because that is where we have the first real development of the Industrial Revolution.
Right. That's why I thought of England.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is why in England there was this mass production starting in the beginning of the 19th century of textiles. And so it started there. That was the very first one. To be honest, I don't even know if it still exists.
Right.
And then you have Harrods, which was in the 1850s.
Right.
In London.
Yep.
Which, of course, still exists.
Yeah.
And then we arrive in Paris.
Okay.
And in Paris, the very, very first department store was the store that still exists called Au Bon Marché.
Yes.
Which is a very beautiful store and is in the 7th arrondissement. And it was opened in 1852. So that's actually not that much later than the first couple of ones that were opened in England.
Right. So they happened in close succession.
In close succession. And again, I was reading the background information. I didn't write down the name of the man. It was a man and his wife who actually had started out as vendors in a small mercery. And now for Americans,
mercery,
a mercery is a place that sells thread and buttons and trim and things like that without selling the bolts of cloth. But he was he was a vendor in a mercery. At the time, only men were salespeople. Women did not work.
Right.
And if you were from the middle class as a woman, and poor people obviously had other worries in mind, but if you were from the middle class, your activity as a woman was you could go to the theater, you could go to a store accompanied by a man, you could go to a park accompanied by people in your family, but you were not supposed to go out wandering on your own.
Right.
And this is in the middle of the 19th century.
See, and then French people are all surprised that that's the way it is in the Middle East in some countries. But that's how it used to be here.
It's
Okay, it was
exactly.
200 years ago, but still.
Still, it wasn't even. Yeah, I mean, it was more. Yeah, not quite 200 years ago, and it was really a big deal. It was like you weren't supposed to do things like that.
Mm-hmm.
You were considered to be a loose woman. It was dangerous, you know. And
No,
so
that's why stories like La Bohème,
right.
you know, she's really scandalous. Why? Because she goes out by herself.
Because she goes out by herself.
Yeah, that's like big scandal.
Big scandal. So
A major plot point.
It's very interesting. So this man, who his name I should have written down. It's something like Bukiko or something like that. Anyway, he and his wife decided they must have heard about the department stores in England, and because they were involved in a world that dealt with textiles and a little bit industrialization, they knew that there was access to things. And so what happened was they got together with somebody else and they managed to put together enough money to buy an old building that was the building that became the first part of Au Bon Marché. And for those people who've never been to Paris or this part of Paris, it's at the juncture of three big avenues at the Métro Sèvres,
Right.
Babylon. And there's a teeny little triangular park there. And at the time, it was very rural. There were a few shops nearby, so they had the access to buying land and and they bought it and they made it a little bit bigger. And
Right. So if you're in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, you're not so far. You're about a kilometer or two away.
Right.
You're not very far. You can hoof it.
you can hoof it.
It's at the edge of the Saint-Germain-des-Prés neighborhood, if you're generous about it.
And it's a very beautiful neighborhood. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Oh,
Right
yeah.
now, it's very. So, of course, the name Au Bon Marché means not expensive.
Right.
And of
But
course,
it has a double entendre because c'est un bon marché, so it's good stuff. We sell
That's
good
true.
stuff, but it also means inexpensive.
that is true.
So it's a great name.
It's a great name.
Yeah.
It's a great name, right? And that is so they chose this name. They were obviously really, really good at figuring out. It would be the equivalent of people doing a study now of what is a good commerce to open, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so like a market study.
A real market study. They had an intuition. This man had a real intuition about it. And so what they decided to do, since they got together enough money to make this investment, then they had a few people help them with the investment, was they made a store that had a little bit of all kinds of things, but specifically that had to do either with clothing, toiletries, mostly directed at women at first.
Yeah.
And the idea was revolutionary because the things were ready-made. Mm-hmm. So you could have adjustments made, but you didn't go into the store, choose a piece of fabric, and then say, could you make this for me? You
Yeah.
could go in. And by virtue of buying things in volume, they had prices. So these are several of the things that were revolutionary, which is really fascinating. Number one, of course, the fact that it was ready-made.
Yeah.
Number two, because it was basically a large choice and there's a certain volume, the prices were considerably lower than if it was custom made.
Yeah.
They offered delivery, so you could go in. At the time, of course, now we've gone back to the idea of delivery.
Yeah.
But in between, it got lost. But it was part of the essential idea of this kind of a store is that you could buy it and then somebody would take it to your house and you could return it. And this was something that had never been done before. So that if you weren't satisfied, you could bring it back. And what happened was they put out a lot of advertising. They were very, very modern in this idea. I mean, it was just a new concept completely. And it addressed specifically to women. Mm-hmm. And what happened was women would go. They would go to, 2 together, 3 together.
Yeah.
And they would go. And at first...
And it was acceptable.
And at first, the vendors were men. And what happened was that women started complaining. Now, whether this was complaints to the management, complaints to their husbands, complaints, I don't know how, but whatever, it got back to the owners. They would complain that they were not comfortable having men put clothes on them or look at them. You know how sometimes you go into a store and they do that. So this was the beginning of women as salespeople. It was part of the revolution of the big department store. So all of these changes in society were brand new. And they came about because of the Industrial Revolution, because it was possible to buy things in mass, because it made things cheaper, and because there was a growing middle class.
Cool.
that had the money. And one of the other things that was a revolution, interestingly enough, because it's weird how things cycle back, is that they would send out catalogs and advertising. So this was the beginning of a modern version of commerce, especially for things that connected to domestic life.
Yeah.
Right? And they put out catalogs, and something I didn't know, but this is why I love things like this. The Hotel Lutetia, which is across the street from the point of the park right there at Sèvres Babylon.
Yeah.
Which is a luxury palace hotel.
Okay.
Which has a very long, complicated history because it was a luxury palace hotel. Then it was taken over by the Gestapo, and it was their headquarters. And then it was a place where people who survived the camps were brought back to before going back home. The hotel was built by the original owners of Au Bon Marché because people would come from far away to go shopping at the department store. It became so famous. They sent catalogs out everywhere in France. So the hotel literally was built to house the people who would be the clients of Bon Marché. I think that's absolutely fabulous, you know?
That's great.
Especially because when you look at it, it's I don't know if it was redone 2 or 3 times, but it's mostly Art Nouveau in its style, you know. So the Art Nouveau came a fair time after the beginning of Bon Marché. But that's how important the idea of a department store became. And, of course, it was an idea that spread. You and I think we've done a podcast about it, or I certainly imagine you've talked about it, the covered galleries that are in Paris.
Yes, we've done an episode about that.
Well,
yes,
it turns
the covered
out
passages.
that one of the things that preceded the department stores was the idea of having these shops in the covered space.
Yeah.
And that it gave some people the idea of expanding that, because the idea was that it was a safe space. It was safe from the elements, but it was also a safe space for women to walk back and forth, and they would have a little salon de thé at the in the middle of something like that. A tea shop, right? And so it was apparently one of the things that was available even in the late 1700s that kind of germinated into this idea of something bigger. And I'm sure since at that time there was a lot of interaction and exchange between France and England, especially about commercial things. Who knows where the idea originally came from? Maybe it came from France and then went back to England and then came back,
or vice versa.
The other way.
Yeah.
So the Bon Marché was a huge commercial success, enormous. And it inspired other people to do the same thing. But what's interesting, and I don't know why, the Bon Marché is the only one that's really famous that was on the left bank. And it's the only one that really stayed on the left bank.
Yeah.
Because all the others are near the Opéra Garnier on Boulevard Haussmann. And that particular area, which is the end of the part of the 9th arrondissement, and it was a part of Paris that was in the process of developing at that time in terms of real estate.
Yeah.
So it was a place where there was space available. And maybe that was one of the reasons. Maybe there was just less space available on the left bank. I don't really know, but I've always wondered why, aside from Au Bon Marché, all of the other big department stores are on the other side.
Well, it's posher. Like, that's where the Elyse Palace is. Well, as you mentioned, that's also where the Opera House is. So the right bank is posher and more for the upper class, and so it makes sense to me that they would put these department stores there.
Yeah, at the time when this store was built, the Bon Marché, I have no idea what the neighborhood was like. I mean, it would be interesting to find out. But you're right. I mean, I think it was a combination of that. It was also a combination of opportunity in terms of space, I think, and investment. The building that is there now is actually a building that was redone in 1869.
Which building?
This is still Bon Marché.
Okay.
And it was built by an architect family named Boileau, Boileau, the father and the son. But the structural work was done by Eiffel.
Ah.
Because he was a structural engineer.
Yeah.
And he had a huge company. He had lots of people working for him. So,
well, and definitely they wanted a big open space.
Exactly.
So it takes a certain kind of
they had
architecture to do that.
Cast iron struts and things like that. And they expanded so that, of course, if you go to the Bon Marché now, it's 2 or 3 blocks.
Yeah.
Because over time they did expand, and over time they have changed. Because from the first time I was in Paris to the most recent time I was in Paris, they have rearranged a lot of the things in Bon Marché. And I just have an anecdote. The daughter of a good friend of mine was living in Paris. This is now going back about 10, 12 years, something like that. And for a couple of years, she worked part-time as a saleswoman at the Bon Marché. She worked in the scarf department. She was trying to break in as a singer for classical music, and she was looking for a job that would allow her a certain amount of freedom. And she used to tell us how strict they were about the clothing and the behavior. And because it's in an area that is now very posh, lots of famous people go there. And one of the people that went was a very famous French actress. I don't think I should name her because you never know. But anyway, a very, very famous French actress who apparently treated the saleswomen like slaves. And it was kind of like, oh, I think I like that. And then she would sort of pick things up and then just sort of drop them. And,
oh, dear.
Would wait for the salespeople to run around and take care of everything. And it put me off the idea of going to Bon Marché. It really did. It's like, I'm not comfortable going to places that are that snobby,
Yeah.
But I have been back since then because once, a number of years ago when I was working with a particular group of women who were in Paris for a week, they went there to do a consultation for bras and underwear. And there's a service, there's one floor that's just that. And you can actually ask for, the saleswomen are trained to measure you and give you consultation on things like that. And that's a whole different world. I'm not used to.
Yeah.
It's very much, what I think that what has happened is that whereas at the beginning it was revolutionary because it was lower priced and more accessible.
Oh, it's totally the opposite.
It's totally
now.
the opposite now. So here we go. So after Bon Marché, we move across to the right bank. We go up Avenue de l'Opéra, and we come to the Opéra Garnier. And right behind it, we have the Boulevard Haussmann. Now, this is a part of Paris that was in the process of being developed exactly at this time, in the middle of the 19th century.
Yeah.
This is under the
middle of 1850s.
The Second Empire, right?
1850s.
Right. The 1850s. And so you have the second oldest of all of these that is still in existence, and that is Le Printemps. And Le Printemps was inspired by Bon Marché, and it was 2 businessmen who were very, very astute businessmen. They weren't necessarily vendors, who got together, created an investment company. They bought a huge piece of land and they annexed 2 buildings that already existed and they had them renovated. And so in 1865, so a little bit later, but not much later, the Printemps was opened. And the Printemps, which is still, at this point, one of the most important of the department stores in Paris, and literally physically the biggest at this point in terms of surface. They invented the concept of sales.
Oh.
It's interesting. It's fascinating, all of this. It's like, how do you beat out the competition? What do you do to innovate, And so at the end of 1866, instead of trying to dump the stock of what they didn't have, one of them came up with the idea of doing a massive sale. And the concept of the sales, the way it exists in France, which of course is very different from in the States, except for the linen sales, which are always the white sales, which happen, of course, right after Christmas, for some reason everywhere. I don't know why. They are the ones who did it, and they were a huge success. Now, the original building is not the building that's there now. The building that is there now was rebuilt because in 1881 there was a terrible fire. So it was rebuilt first in Art Nouveau style. They bought up more land. They annexed a huge piece of land. And they were really brilliant business people because they knew that there was going to be a metro stop very close by. And it was also very close to the Gare Saint-Lazare. Mm-hmm. So it brought in people from the outlying areas, and they are accessible. I mean, literally, you can just walk 5-10 minutes from the Gare Saint-Lazare,
Yeah, it's
and
not far.
you get to Printemps. So altogether, they built 3 buildings. They expanded. They are the first of the department stores to put in elevators. So this is even before the Eiffel Tower and things like that, which made them. It was a thing people came to see. So you have huge elevators. People could go up to the top. And just like later on the Galerie Lafayette, they created a building with this gorgeous, gorgeous colored glass dome.
Right.
It's absolutely splendid to see. And
the way you see it is you go into, at Printemps, there's a thing called Brasserie du Printemps. And you need to follow those signs because they have several little cafes and places to eat. But Brasserie du Printemps is the one underneath the dome.
Underneath the dome.
And you're sitting underneath the dome.
It's gorgeous.
And you can have your lunch. And it's a little bit more expensive than other places, but it's so worth it because the food is fine. It's not gourmet or anything, but it's fine, and it's gorgeous.
And it's gorgeous, yeah. And so this is what happened because unfortunately there was a second fire, and then in the late 1880s they rebuilt it again, and they put in electricity, which with safety measures. Because of the problems with fire, because of gaslight, because of all these things. And then they added the rotundas. So if you take a picture, if you see the Printemps from the outside, it's an enormous building. There are actually 3 buildings. There are 3 buildings connected by iron bridges, which is another thing. They have these walkways, so you don't even have to go back downstairs onto the sidewalk. But you have these enormous rotundas. It's kind of strange. It's a combination of Art Nouveau, Art Deco, fake medieval, but it's fun. It's gorgeous and it's fun, and it's got mosaics around the rotundas. On each of the corners has this kind of fake medieval tower, but it's very beautiful.
Yeah, they're kind of Byzantine, I would think. I'll put photos.
It's really nice. And so that the new idea, electric automatic elevators, although I suppose they had people running them the way they did in lots of buildings at the time, plus the idea of sales made them even more interesting to people than the Bon Marché.
And what they have that's outstanding today is that on the outside at Christmas time, they do beautiful displays to attract families.
Exactly.
And they even have like little platforms for kids to stand on, so the kids are right up front, and it's beautiful. What's strange to me is that is all around the store outside,
right?
Whereas at Galerie Lafayette, the decorations are all inside.
Yeah.
So it's smarter if you bring people inside of your store, because then you have a chance to sell something to them. But if you keep them all by the droves outside of the store, I don't know if that was smart, but that's how they do it.
I don't know, but believe it or not, all of that started in the 1920s.
Okay.
When they, maybe it's because it was a moment when with beginning of robotics and the idea of automation, they
automatons.
Automaton, right?
Yeah.
So they were the very first ones. It started in the they rebuilt again in just before World War I, and then starting in the 1920s, they became really famous for their windows, and of course the animated windows, and the idea that they would advertise, come to see these windows. First, they were not just for Christmas; they were just to bring people. It's interesting what you're saying, because for them the idea was if you come and look in the windows, you'll want to go inside. But it is true now, and of course I've done this a number of times, people go, especially if people go to Paris at Christmas time, they go to see the windows.
Right.
I mean, they stand on line to go to see these windows.
Yeah.
They're absolutely incredible. Just another little anecdote about the Printemps before we move on to the next store. In 1944, they took down the entire glass cupola because they were afraid it was going to be bombed by the Allies when they started pushing through and when the Germans started to leave. And so it was taken to Clichy, which is a town just outside of Paris, and it was put back together again. as soon as the war was over.
Wow.
So what did they put in between? I haven't got a clue. Wood, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know.
Can you imagine?
You could do a temporary roof. I don't know. That's like crazy.
I mean, I know that a couple of cathedrals had that. Like Chartres, they actually took the windows down.
Yeah.
But the idea that they took this enormous dome.
The dome, yeah. I don't know. It's
fabulous, huh?
This is the first I've heard about it. So
the one next door to it, which is also very, very famous, and it now is not only, I don't know if it's quite as big, but it may be because it has 3 separate buildings, is, of course, the Galerie Lafayette.
Yeah.
And the difference between the Galerie Lafayette, there are two things. One is just historical, but the other is commercial, is that of all of these, the only one that decided to create branch stores all over the country is Galerie Lafayette.
Right. So we have a Galerie Lafayette in Toulouse. Yeah. You have them in all major cities.
All major
France.
cities.
Yeah.
And that is, it came a little bit later. They also started originally in 1865, exactly the same year. Mm-hmm. There was another big piece of land. At this point, this is really when that whole area is developing. It's all brand new around there with these big wide boulevards. And in this case, it was 2 cousins from Alsace who were originally commercial vendors in Strasbourg, probably. I'm not sure, but they were from Alsace, who decided to create a store. And they named it Galerie Lafayette because one of the side streets was Rue Lafayette.
Right.
Right. Simple as that.
Boulevard Lafayette, yeah.
They were, no, let's not mess around. This is easy, we don't have to worry about poetics or whatever else, I mean, it's like,
no, this is nice. He's a hero.
Right. So there were 2 cousins. One's name was Théophile Bader and the other Alphonse Kahn. And they went to Paris and they opened up the Galerie Lafayette. And they did the same thing as the people who started with the Printemps, which was that they created a very big store and they had absolutely everything in it. And they decided the 2 things that they did a little bit differently, and it's very interesting, is this first thing that immediately at the end of the 19th century, they started with the idea of opening up small branches in other cities, sending out, I guess, other people, because they had a lot of people that worked with them as an association. But also, they were the very first ones to decide, and this is strange because it really is a little bit different, to really go for top prices and top value. So right now, for instance, in the Galerie Lafayette, what I don't know if this is true in the others. It may be true in the others. Each of the brands that has clothing there, I mean, there's other things besides clothing because obviously there's lots of jewelry, toiletries, and everything. But they rent the space.
Right.
They rent the space. But they decided that they were really going to make it top of the line.
Right. So they'll have big name, Calvin Klein,
so they have big names.
And people like that you've heard of, and it's the same with across the street. They have a big area, the housing stuff. Yeah, they sell like plates and cutlery and things like that. And I spent a lot of time looking around because I was looking for new cutlery, and it's all brands.
It's all brands.
You're gonna have all these famous brand makers of housewares, and you decide.
Right.
Yeah.
But now they expanded also, and so there are actually now 3 buildings. There's one for women, one for men, and then the housewares. Mm-hmm. And that's across the street. And the housewares down on the street level, talking about the food. If you go through the chocolate section, you can die, just from the smell,
It's very nice.
And there's a coffee section. They have
really nice spices.
Oh, they have
selection.
Everything. And then the linens that they have, and then the housewares that they have. I mean, it is unbelievable.
And I think they do, by now, Galerie Lafayette also has their own brand.
Yes.
So
they were the first ones to do that too.
Right.
They were very, very good in terms of commercializing everything, and they also asked for investment by certain industrialists. Mm-hmm. So they were really in advance in terms of that kind of commerce.
And they also have a website, and you can order on their website, and they'll ship to you. I mean,
can Printemps do that? I wonder.
I don't know. I don't think so. Uh-huh. I think that's the website is. So I would say that Galerie Lafayette is more probably More with it.
More with it. Well, it sounds like they were even more with it even at the end of the 19th century. I mean, they were really in the front lines of this, and they were the first ones to create their own brand. They were the first ones to create branch stores in different places. Now, you have the danger of overexpansion, like something like happened like with Starbucks, where they just overexpanded too much. I have no idea. I mean, even Rodez has a Galerie Lafayette, a little Galerie Lafayette. I mean, you go into medium-sized cities everywhere in France, practically, and there is a branch of Galerie Lafayette.
Yeah.
Now, and the building is also gorgeous, and you and I both have been inside. And they were the first ones to add escalators.
Aha.
So Printemps had the elevators, they had the escalators, and they have also a dome that is to die for.
Right. So what's different at this one is that the center part of the department store is open. Onto this dome. You can see it from the ground. At Printemps, you don't. At Printemps, it's full, I guess...
filled in floors.
Yeah, all the floors are filled in. Galerie Lafayette, it goes all the way to the top. And they've added recently a glass walk, which is free, but there's always a line. But you can walk onto this glass thing that kind of shakes a tiny bit, I mean, it's... And you can
down.
You can look up and down. So on the glass walk, you're in the center underneath the dome.
Really?
Yeah. It's very fun to do. It's free. It takes about an hour. When I did it, we waited in line about an hour.
An hour to do it.
Yeah, and I had to kind I'm a little afraid of heights and stuff, but I had to have the photos.
Wow.
So
no, I guess the last time I was there, they didn't have that. But of course, if you lean out over, once you get up to a certain level, you can lean in and look at the dome. It's absolutely,
it's gorgeous.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And then of course they have, Printemps does now too, they have rooftop cafes.
Right, they have rooftop access, both of them.
Access,
So on the Galerie Lafayette, as well as Printemps, they have like a champagne bar up there,
and a cafe.
Different things. So and
that's where the cafeteria is up on top.
On Galerie Lafayette, that's where the cafeteria is, and it's not that expensive, really.
No.
You can eat a decent meal for €20.
Oh, it's really fun. I mean, to go up there.
But it's a cafeteria,
it's a real cafeteria, but
you take your tray and you go pick what you want.
and you look out, and there are windows. If you get a seat by the window, you look out. So a little anecdote about them, interestingly enough. Of all the big department stores that still exist in Paris, the Galerie Lafayette is the only one that has stayed, the ownership has stayed in the family of the original founders.
Okay.
And it's the descendants of one of them. That is Théophile Bader, not the other one. They were actually cousins. They also happen to have been Jewish. And in 1940, the Germans requisitioned the Galerie Lafayette and confiscated all of their goods and gave Galerie Lafayette and all of its property, everything connected to it, to a Swiss man who was a collaborator with the Germans, and to a French industrialist who was also a collaborator with the Germans. And they took over the building. The two owners, one was old, so he was just put under house arrest. The other, his cousin and his son, were both sent away. By some miracle, they actually survived being sent away to the camps. And in 1944, when the Allies liberated Paris, the two sons-in-laws who were married to the daughters of the one that was sent away to a camp, who were then considered to be the managers, they were able to take over. They were to get back the store, and it is now the great-grandchildren who are, in fact, the owners of Galerie Lafayette.
Cool. Yeah. So when you're in Paris, I think that's a must-do.
Oh, I think it is too.
Go at least to one of them.
Yeah.
Pick one.
Pick one.
But go do that. And from the rooftop, you get, it's a free access, like I mentioned before. And you get a nice view onto Paris. So you should do it.
Yeah. And then just the last one. And this is I put down here last but not least, because it is no longer a department store, but the building is still there. And so there's a little bit of story attached to that. And that is the Samaritan.
La Samaritaine, yes.
The Samaritan, which is the only one that's along the Seine, basically. I mean, it's just there's a street, but this is a river, there's a street, and then there it is. And it's a huge building. And it turns out this one was started in 1870, so very soon after the others. It was the largest until it was no longer a department store. 40, and I was thinking if you have a calculator, we can figure this out in square feet because people might not understand square meters. 48,000 square meters. You have to multiply by 9. It's a lot. It's very big.
Let's see. So I'll Google it while you talk.
Okay. So it was opened in 1870 and stopped being a department store in 2005. Yeah. So its life as a department store was 135 years. It was built as a magnificent Art Nouveau and then Art Deco building.
It's almost 600,000 square feet.
It's huge. Yeah. It's huge, right? Yeah. And of course, I don't know. Obviously, it's a question of management and business because the other three are still doing fine. Bon Marché, Printemps, and Galeries Lafayette. Whatever happened in terms of the management of the Samaritan, I really don't know. However, it was losing money for quite a while, and it was closed down as a department store in 2005. It was bought up by LVMH, which is a huge company that's Moet, Hennessy, Louis Vuitton. Mm-hmm. And originally, it was supposed to be reopened as a department store. And then they put in a request with, I guess, the city administration of Paris to convert it into offices, luxury apartment buildings, and just have a few shops. And it became a huge scandal in Paris. Yeah. Because two things. Number one, they didn't want any more luxury apartment buildings. They wanted something that was either going to be shops or was going to be a little bit more equitable in terms of what would be there. And also because that was not what they had promised when they had bought it. So this went on for a while. There was a court case. And eventually LVMH more or less won. But the concession they made was that it would have a part of it that would be relatively not too expensive apartments. And I'm saying it like that because nothing along the Seine River is going to be cheap no matter what, Yeah. So in fact, it's been in the process of renovation for years. Even when we did our tour together in Paris, part of it was covered up with these huge things. It's been covered up for years. It was supposed to open up this year. And because of the virus, the COVID, it will probably not open up until sometime in 2021. The building was, the whole concept of the Samaritan was the idea of a couple who were well off. They invested in the property there in 1870, which is interesting because it's a much older part of the city. It's right across from the Saint-Michel Bridge. And it's very strange because how they managed, they probably destroyed a whole bunch of old houses in order to build it up. And the couple's names were, his family name was Cognac with a CK at the end, a CQ at the end. Mm-hmm. And her last name was J.
Yeah, Cognac G.
Cognac G. And one of the things they did, and this was apparently typical, was they opened a museum. Mm-hmm. One of the things that a lot of these owners of big department stores, who were the early rich people of France, did, was they created either hospitals, which is what the owners of Galeries Lafayette did, or they created hospices, or they gave money to various charities, and they made a museum, which is in the Marais, which is actually a lovely little private museum, and it is the Cognac G Museum.
Yeah, it's also the TV studios. The major TV studios in Paris for a long time were called Cognac G. So I assume, when I was growing up, the anchors would announce, Studio Cognac G,
really?
blah, 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 So... Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. I absolutely did not know that. I have no idea what happened, whether they sold it off to like their children. No, now I remember. They never had children. So what happened was it was the investors who took over when they died. And it was the investors who obviously had some problem with management and running it. And that eventually was why it may have just been too big for all I know. You know, I mean, you have other stores. And of course, the irony is that now many people don't shop in big department stores anymore because they're too expensive.
Yeah, they're really not geared for everybody, except for maybe possibly Galeries Lafayette a little bit, but even then it's upper class.
It's kind of middle upper to upper.
And you walk in there, someone like me, you know, like a country bumpkin from working class, definitely working class. You have you walk in there and it's all these fancy ladies, a lot of them Asian.
Right.
A lot of the staff is Asian by now because they have to be able to speak Chinese.
Chinese and Japanese.
Yeah. Right. And it feels a little, I feel a little out of place in there, I must tell you. I mean, I go in, I never buy anything other than food and drinks,
right?
Which I like anywhere. but you know, I gawk, but it's not my game.
It's funny because I really do feel the same. I'm especially in the bigger ones, like in Paris. I really feel uncomfortable. I feel like it's totally not my thing. But I will go into hours here when there are sales.
Right.
And when there are sales, they can sometimes have some really good sales, you know.
Right. If you want something really special, like, okay, my husband has bought nice there. Scarves. Yeah. My husband has bought, sometimes he likes to wear a hat.
Uh-huh.
So we'll go in and look at the hats. Or if you want nice gloves.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
It's a good place to go. You know, things like that. Little things like that I might buy there, but I'm not going to go there to buy a dress.
No.
Whatever.
No. But I do, it is true. I buy lots of scarves there when they're on sale. I've bought some nice leather things and some nice jewelry because they have a wide range, especially here in Toulouse. And of course, it's really not the same atmosphere completely as in Paris, but they have a really nice range from good costume jewelry to, you know, super, super, super fancy. And in fact, I just read that there's a very famous, very fancy jeweler called Mauboussin. Which makes beautiful things with diamonds and stuff like that. And Galeries Lafayette is now part owner of them. You know? So they've actually managed to invest in high-end jewelry. But they really are like that.
We'll do another episode where we'll talk about other types of shopping in Paris.
Other types of shopping.
That is interesting. And also we should do one about la haute couture.
Yes.
So, you know, Boulevard Saint-Honoré.
Yes.
Because that's another beautiful set of stores that you can see.
You can see.
But that's even higher class.
It's even higher. And there, I mean, I will go into Galeries Lafayette and go to certain sections. But I don't think I actually would feel comfortable going into even the pret-a-porter of Dior. I mean, it's just too.
I did.
You
it's
did?
Okay. They're lovely.
You.
They're lovely.
Really?
They're very, very, very well trained.
Oh,
so
they don't look down on you.
Not at all. Not at all. No, they know better. They know that a country bumpkin can be really rich.
That's true. That's true. In any event, it is fascinating to know because our customs and our way of doing things have changed so much, but the history of shopping is actually like social history.
Yeah, goes along with real life in France.
Now I can't wait to go back and go wandering and go through the chocolate section again.
Merci, Elyse.
You're welcome, Eddie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you, Lester Chu and Susan Burris, for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. Patrons enjoy several rewards that you'll find listed at patreon.com/join us, Patreon. Join us, no spaces or dashes. This week, I shared a lunch break French Patreon reward about les faux amis in French. Those are the pesky words that seem to be the same in French and in English, but alas, they are not, and hilarity ensues sometimes. I also shared a new photo, and patrons, I urge you to check your inbox. You should have gotten notifications from patrons, or go visit your Patreon dashboard once in a while. Again, it's patreon.com/join us to see the different reward tiers, and thank you so much for giving back. I hope you'll start planning your next trip to France soon. And if you're not sure if your itinerary for France is as good as it needs to be, let me review it for you. It'll cost you $50, but you get a tailor-made day-by-day itinerary for you and your party. Email Annie@joinusinfrance.com to set that up and write itinerary review in the subject line. And if you'd like to support the show without spending a penny you wouldn't have otherwise, before you go shopping on Amazon, go to the bottom of any page on joinusinfrance.com and click on the Amazon ad. Because you came to Amazon through my site, I get a small commission and it doesn't cost you a penny more. Same thing with the booking.com ad. And thank you so much. All right, so French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe made a big announcement on how we're going to proceed in reopening France. So as promised, let me keep you up to date. First of all, the pandemic is still going on in France. In the US right now, you have 316 deaths per million. In France, we have 440 deaths per million. The worst country in the world is Spain with 580 deaths per million, followed closely by the UK and Italy with 558 deaths per million. So this thing is not over. What's changed in France is that now family doctors are back to work and medical laboratories can all test for COVID-19. Doctors' visit and blood tests related to COVID-19 are free. Well, not just blood test, any test. I think it took too long to get to that point, but here we are. The message being pushed by the government is that at the first sign of feeling sick, make an appointment with your family doctor who will see you, evaluate you, and write you a prescription for a COVID test. Most test results are given within 8 to 24 hours, but it could take longer depending on, workload, weekends, stuff like that. If you have COVID-19, contact tracers will get in touch with those you've been in close and prolonged contact with, and they will be also directed to take a test. I don't know about you, but if someone called to say you've been in prolonged contact with someone who's tested positive, would you like to go take a test right now? I would do it. Especially since the test is free and they'll fax the prescription to the medical laboratory of my choice. No need to see a doctor if I don't have symptoms. So, I can just go right to the test. I would do it, definitely. If executed quickly, this system should limit the spread of new cases. That's what Germany has been doing for many weeks now, and it's worked really well for them. Generally speaking, in my village, I can get an appointment with my doctor on the same day or maybe the next day. Blood tests are walk-in with little wait. So should anyone in my family feel sick, we know we can go from worried to death to tested within a day or two at most. And that's a game changer. We know the vast majority of people will do the right thing and self-isolate once they know they are positive for COVID-19. And if they see a doctor, hopefully the doctor has been able to convince them to self-isolate. So with that in mind, the restrictions are being relaxed because we cannot stay on lockdown forever. There are dire consequences to a terrible economy, and people living in fear and isolation is awful as well, and we can't ignore that. The Prime Minister was careful to remind everyone who is at high risk to continue to exercise extreme vigilance. As a matter of fact, in France, anyone who has one of the conditions that puts them in a high-risk category can continue to receive unemployment. Who decides who's at risk and who's a slacker? That will be the job of primary care doctors. And yes, these people will get a doctor's note. So that's cool. So with that caveat, lots of things are going to reopen in France with new public health measures in place. Most of these things will happen on June 2nd all over France, but some will have to wait until June 22nd for the Paris region because they still have more virus going on in the Paris region. Cafes, bars, and restaurants can reopen starting on June 2nd. Cities will work with restaurant owners to give them more room for tables on sidewalk or even on the pavement, if appropriate. Restaurant staff will have to wear masks. Patrons won't, unless they are moving about the restaurant to go to the bathroom or something like that. I bet everyone is going to want to sit on the terrace. We can already get a haircut, but public swimming pools will reopen. So will gyms. Gyms. Oh, they won't see me. I normally never go to gyms anyway. Parks, lakes, beaches, theaters, and museums. Le Louvre is preparing to reopen on June 6th. I don't know what health safety measures all these venues will put in place, but I am sure they are working on that. Movie theaters will all open on the same day, nationally, on June 22nd. Summer camps for kids can reopen on June 22nd as well. Hotels didn't have a mandate to close, but many of them did because of the lack of customers. I suspect they'll start seeing more business now. Vacation rentals can also open. The message is, feel free to go on vacation, but stay in France if possible. Starting on June 2nd, there will be no more limitations on how far we can drive from home. What's going to stay against the rules? Okay, no gatherings in the public space of more than 10 people. No team sports or contact sports. No dance clubs, no pool halls, no gambling establishments. Stadiums and horse racetracks will remain closed. Big gatherings are still a no-go. There are questions about things like weddings. Churches can reopen with physical distancing. Town halls can celebrate weddings if, again, with physical distancing. You could hold a reception in a big open space, but are you going to dance? Are you going to mingle? I'm glad I'm not getting married this year because it's really not a good time for that. But I think it's best to leave it to people's best judgment and hope nobody gets offended when some people decline to come hang out because they are worried. Sure, grandma should be at the wedding, but maybe it's better if she passes or attends on Zoom and nobody should hold it against these people who want to be cautious. That's just, some people need to stay away. We attended a Zoom funeral this week, so you do what you have to do. This business of no gatherings in the public space for more than 10 people is, in my opinion, going to be impossible to enforce. First of all, nobody's going to be counting heads. And secondly, because I can be with 9 friends on the riverbanks and another group of 10 can be right next to us, so long as they are a meter away from us, who's going to bring the yardstick? I think it'll be up to each person to wonder if they really want to be there and risk it. We're all grown-ups. Well, except for the kids. But hopefully the kids have parents who can make good decisions for them. Let's talk about borders right now. I know that matters to most of you. Borders within Europe are set to open on June 15th. On June 15th, they'll also announce what to do about opening up to borders outside of Europe. All European countries have agreed to open our borders to the outside at the same time. We've already heard that Spain and Italy intend to open to everyone on July 1st. I'm not sure France and Germany will be able to convince them to do otherwise. I have no idea what the UK is going to do. They are officially still in Europe until the end of the year, but I haven't heard. So for now, what we know for sure is that restrictions to travel within Europe will be lifted starting June 15th. And for the rest, it'll probably happen soon, but they are negotiating and nothing is official yet. We should know more by June 15th. So for all of you asking if you can come to France in the fall or whatever date that is, the answer is probably yes. But that yes is not official yet. So don't pop the champagne bottle just yet. But it seems more and more likely to me. I'll leave it to you to decide if it's a good idea. Would I get on a flight for a vacation on the other side of the world next fall? No way. Would I consider it next year? Yes, quite possibly. But we all have to consider our own situations and our own tolerance for risk. Honestly, I've blocked off a week to drive to my apartment in Spain in late July, and I'm not even sure I'll do that. I'm more likely to go spend a few nights at some relais et chateaux, in the countryside in southern France, not close to home. We're very lucky to be in a place that has such lovely places to visit. So that would be a quick getaway that feels completely safe to me. I'd love your feedback. Tag Join Us in France on social media, and I'll see it and respond to you. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate it if you'd share it with someone. There are many ways to find the Join Us in France travel podcast, including Apple Podcasts or any podcast app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, and they can even play it on their computer. The show is also on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, and Twitter, where you can all talk back and ask questions. But the best way to send me questions is to email me, Annie@joinusinfrance.com, because then I know you're a podcast listener, and I love talking to my listeners. Have a great week. Stay safe. Maybe start your trip planning, because, it's coming back, I think. And I'll talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2020 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.